today with Sean and Vika from the YouLi team. Hi Vika, hi Sean.
Hello.
I like how when I move down here, I get like little devil horns.
I had like twisted hands. Look at this. It's like, whoa, what's happening?
Fun with virtual backgrounds. So yes, travel is back and our clients are seeing bookings come through. Yay! It's just been amazing to see how quickly the travel boom has just exploded across the travel industry, and we understand that a lot of you are struggling to handle this boom, which is wonderful. We love this kind of problem, and it's hard to find new staff, and it's hard to find people to help you manage all of these new bookings. So we at YouLi are focused on enabling your automation so that you have to do less manual work and hire less staff to accomplish the same things. And so today's conversation is about using YouLi automations to connect your YouLi payments or bookings through to your accounting platforms. So we're going to focus today on QuickBooks as the example. So QuickBooks Online, if your desktop version of QuickBooks, this won't necessarily help you. But if you're doing the QuickBooks Online, you can use this automation in order to focus on getting your bookings instead of focusing on accounting. So that's what our call is today, is to improve your experience in that regard. We are going to be talking some technical things. We're going to talk about webhooks and Zapier and invoices and lots of little technical things, which you may not love, but you love getting paid, and this is part of the deal. So if you're not following along completely, first of all, Sean is here to ask all the good questions to make sure that I don't over technical jargon you. But also you can pass this video along to your accountant or bookkeeper, because they will probably know what to do with that, or your technical advisor if they're the ones who are setting up your automations. So we do recommend getting an advisor to help you through this process of connecting your YouLi platform to your accounting platform. We do offer some consulting services, but remember, we are not financial advisors. We're not bookkeepers. We're not accountants. So we can only tell you what we can do, and we can help you accomplish that with the technology, but we can't tell you which of the 3 different scenarios we're going to explain today are right for your business. We just know that these are things businesses choose to do, but only you and your advisors can know which one to use. So with that in mind, we're going to get started kind of explaining the automation that's possible. And so we're going to start by just jumping into the YouLi platform really quickly and showing you that when you're logged in, you can click on reports and payments, and that'll give you a list of all the payments that have come in for you recently. It defaults to the last 7 days, and you can filter that there. So when these payments come in, that's great. You could check this box and export them and then manually upload them into your QuickBooks platform or your accounting platform. And if you have zero, you can actually do that through the YouLi platform. There's actually a button to push to zero, and we have a direct integration there, but it's manual. So you have to go in, or your bookkeeper has to go in and choose to push those. So what we're talking about today is automation. So the minute one of these payments comes in, it will actually trigger what we call a Zap. So this is the Zapier platform. You will need to have an account with Zapier to make this work, but you can also have a developer build a direct integration there if you would like. So just let us know if you're interested in exploring that. But out of the box, we work directly with Zapier. So all you have to do is click into Zapier and set up a trigger. Here you can see I've got YouLi as the app, and we've got a new payment on any owned trip. So notice that we have 2 options here: new payment on trip and new payment on any owned trip. So new payment on trip is if you're handling a special trip and you just want to handle those payments. But generally, you're going to choose any owned trip. So that's any trip that you own. If a payment comes in, it will trigger this event. I'm just going to pause right there and just make sure I haven't lost you yet, Sean. How are you feeling about triggers and payments?
Makes sense. You said that you have to have a Zapier account. Do you have to purchase a premium account, or will any Zapier level account work? Or does it depend?
That's a great
on
question.
the need?
You can get started with the free version of Zapier to make all of this and test it out, and you get a certain number of events. So you pay by the number of triggers and actions that you run on the platform. So if you just have one trip, you might be able to get away with that sort of free tier of Zapier, but I think it's maybe 1,000 events or something like that. So if you're running a number of trips, then you will need to upgrade to at least their $25 a month plan. And as we progress, we're going to talk about a feature called Paths, which is a much more complicated one that larger businesses need to use. And then you would need the more premium account there. So the next level
Got
up.
it.
Yep.
Cool.
That's a great question. So yeah, there's a small fee associated with this automation, but it is relatively small given the amount of time that it saves you, because then you don't have to go and download that data or click buttons. It just happens for you. So what we're doing right now, you do this once, you set it up, you test it, and then you forget it, because then automatically the payments from YouLi are going to get triggered here, and they're going to cause the following things to happen. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like. Let me, so when this trigger happens, a new payment on YouLi, we're telling Zapier to then go find that customer in QuickBooks Online. So we go to QuickBooks, and you will then choose QuickBooks Online and find customer, and you'll log in with your account, and then you'll set up that action. And so you're going to say, I want to look for the person who made this payment. And you're going to do this very important thing down at the bottom, create a QuickBooks Online customer if it doesn't exist yet. So this is important because we want to make sure that your QuickBooks data matches your YouLi data. So they've registered and paid on YouLi, and then we either find them in your QuickBooks account if they're already there, or we make a new customer if they are not already in QuickBooks. Then we have a little action filter here. Now this is optional, but we do recommend some kind of filter. And in this particular case, we're saying we only want to push payment amounts that are greater than 0 and that have been successful. There's some advanced things that you can do here, because we do pass through like pending and refunds and some things like that. But generally, we're going to say most of you will only want the payments that are greater than 0 and are successful to actually push through to QuickBooks. So this is part of our standard template that we recommend for the basic automation from YouLi payments to QuickBooks. And I would say only change this if you really know why you're changing it. So otherwise, I would suggest you keep that in there. Any questions on that, Sean?
I don't think so. That was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where, you know, sometimes people put in like a $0 payment just to kind of hold a booking or something like that. And that's the kind of stuff you don't necessarily want to push through to QuickBooks.
Well, actually, one question. You said the create a customer, you know, if one doesn't already exist. I assume that means if you have been using QuickBooks already to manually log things, it will notice that that customer exists already. Does it look at like their email or their name or
That's
all
right.
of those fields?
Yeah. So you populate that in the setup action here, and it will generally look up by email.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so look, you may end up with some duplicates because people have so many emails these days. So you could potentially have somebody who is already in your QuickBooks with a different email address, and then they come and register on YouLi and they pay on a new one. So you will end up with 2 Daves, you know, and if it's the same person, you can then of course always merge those together in QuickBooks on your side. This automation does not handle that for you. So if someone can figure out how to handle that problem, everyone that we've worked with these kinds of automations struggles with the fact that people use different emails with the same business and then expect us to just know that they're the same person. But it doesn't really matter in the sense that it just means that you have 2 Daves in your QuickBooks, but the invoice that's there for the purposes of bookkeeping is fine. It will just mess up your lifetime value calculations on Dave, because you have to go in and merge those 2 records to know that Dave has actually spent this much money instead of only this much money.
Got it.
Yep. And so then the final step, and I love this one is our basic automation. There's only 4 steps. And so the 4th one is the main one, which is to create the invoice. So this is something where there's a lot of discussion about this, and I expect that discussion will continue. Please do so in our community to ask the question of, should I make an invoice? Should I make a payment? what should the payment create in QuickBooks. Now, if you are doing cash accounting, then making an invoice can be the simplest way to match this up. And so basically when the traveler pays the $500 deposit on YouLi, it will create a single invoice in QuickBooks for $500. And then when that money comes into the bank account from the credit card or from the bank transfer, your accountant or your bookkeeper can actually match those together. And so that's what this allows you to do. It's really simple, but it doesn't work for accrual accounting, and it doesn't handle the fact that maybe that $500 deposit is not necessarily revenue you can recognize at the time of payment. I'm going to sort of stop there in terms of explaining that. I just want to make sure that it's clear. Revenue recognition is different than cash flow accounting, which is what this scenario includes. And so if you should check with your advisor whether or not this will work for the way you run your books, or whether or not you need to do one of our more advanced ones, which we're going to get to. So with that in mind, this is the simplest one, and this makes sure that your QuickBooks has an invoice for every payment successfully made in YouLi. And so from here, you'll just need to go through, and we're publishing these templates. We'll link to them inside the thread here in the community, and it has some defaults about the data that you need to populate here. But I think the important thing to note is on the tax side of this. So YouLi doesn't manage your tax accounting. That's something that QuickBooks will do. And this is where you get to control these kinds of things, like whether or not it's taxable, non-taxable, or if you have some custom sales tax. That's, again, something that you and your advisors need to agree on, but you can configure it here. Now, our template says non-taxable, right? Because we don't know what tax scenario your business is in with regards to these payments. So that is something you will definitely need to make sure you're reviewing and putting correctly before you turn on this automation. Alternatively, your bookkeeper might need to handle it one by one. So it creates the invoice in draft mode, and then your bookkeeper can then edit them as needed from there. But hopefully you can talk to them in advance and decide what tax accounting needs to be set here and set it up correctly. I'll pause there because I've said a lot of words. How are you doing, Sean?
Perfect. This is all making sense. Cool. So tax, you said it comes in non-taxable. That's something that most people will probably have to go in and adjust to their specific needs, whether like country or depending where they're located.
It's very much dependent on your tax jurisdiction. So if you're in so for example, in Australia, if you're selling overseas travel, you generally don't have to apply tax. So that's just the nature of that kind of outbound travel product in Australia. If you're selling a domestic tour inside the United States in a particular state, you might need to collect sales tax. Now that might be based on the trip. Like, it could, and so we don't know, right? So I think that the important thing is the YouLi team can only give you the tools to do what you need to do according to your state and national tax laws, but we can't advise on that. So we have seen so far most of our clients are in situations where there's not a complicated tax scenario. But if you have a complicated tax scenario, this is where you would start to work on that. Noting as well that that we do pass the tax data from YouLi through. Now that's a more advanced one we're not going to cover today. So if you do use the YouLi taxes and fees feature on your packages, we can consult with you or your advisors on how to pull that data through into these automations. But it's just, there's a few extra steps in terms of configuring QuickBooks to pull that data in properly. But the out-of-the-box version allows you to do these settings. And so whatever you have set in your QuickBooks will appear here, and you can choose that. And then looking here, we've defaulted the description of the item in the invoice to be the payment description, which includes the reference code on the trip name, and the installment. And then we also put the group size. So we tell you how many people this is a payment for. We also put in the service date. Actually, so I'm just going to change this one. here, this is a perfect time to discuss this, which is changing it from the, maybe I need to re-pull some data. This service date should actually be the trip start date. So let me just go back up and re-pull some data here. And we'll pull out our new, you're going to get a little Zapier lesson in terms of pulling data. So when you're testing out a trigger, you just click into here and load more, and then you can get some new payment data. And then you can click to continue. And then we're going to go through to here and click continue and continue. Gotta love Zapier. All right, so here we are back into our invoice feature or invoice step. And the thing I want to change is my service date. I'm just gonna say. So notice before that data wasn't there. And so I went back up to get some new data to refresh that. So this is a new feature that we just released last week to push through the trip start date. So why does that matter? Like payment date, trip start date, like, what difference does that make? Well, the difference is the service date is saying, when is this service actually going to be provided? Because that matters if you're doing your accrual accounting or keeping track of the fact that this money cannot be considered as revenue until the trip is actually delivered. And so if you do manage your accounting that way, and you do want to keep track of the fact that, yeah, the payment was made now, today, but the trip doesn't start until 2023. And so for the purposes of accounting for that revenue, not the cash, but the revenue, you'll want to make sure that your trip start date is included in here for the service date.
Great.
That was a whole bunch of concepts. How much of that made sense?
I think all of it. But and all these templates though are, you said that they're going to have access to these Zapier templates, so they'll have, when they go in and they're putting in this data, they'll have something to start with. They won't have to build this.
So we're
from the ground up.
We're gonna post these links so that you can just grab these and load them in, and then it'll just give you a little bit of a jump start for our recommendation here. And so hopefully that helps people know which are the right values to put in there. Things like auto generate is what we recommend for invoice number. Of course, you don't have to do it exactly the way that we've suggested here. This is just our guidance on how to do a really simple automation, right?
Sure. Now, if somebody needed help setting this up, and they had somebody on their team, would that be a Zapier person or a QuickBooks expert? Like, who would be kind of the expert to choose this information?
That's a really great question. I think it's a combination of those two, right? And this is where we can assist, and you can book in a consulting call with us to be the sort of advisors on the technical side of, like, if your advisor tells you that you need a particular date here, but you're not understanding which of the many dates we're giving you to use, then you can get us in as experts on that. So just book in that consulting call with the YouLi team.
Sure.
Or you can potentially hire, there are, a lot of our clients have technical people on staff or on call who help them manage their websites or other kinds of automations. And they can definitely help you out with these things as well in terms of the setup of your Zaps. So yeah, there's the Zap expertise. There's the understanding what data is coming from YouLi expertise, which hopefully this call is giving you enough. Like if you want to give this recording to your technical person or your Zapier person, because they don't have to be a full developer. Like we do work with a lot of clients who have kind of tech savvy staff who can work with this, even though they're not developers. So you can give them this recording. They can see what we're doing here, and then they'll be able to pick it up really quickly and then customize for the needs that you have as a business. And pairing that with advice from your financial advisors, your bookkeepers, your accountants. So keeping in mind that your bookkeeper and accountant probably doesn't know Zapier really well. Some of them might, but most of them will not. But they can tell you things like, oh no, you shouldn't make an invoice. You should make a payment, which is the next example that we're going to get to.
Got
You know,
it.
they can tell you what objects should be created in QuickBooks. They just won't necessarily know how to make Zapier do that. So yeah, it is a bit of a tricky thing in terms of getting all your advisors lined up. But also, of course, if you do book in a consulting call with us, we're happy to have your bookkeeper on that call and then working through that conversation so that we can give you a Zapier flow that you can just turn on. And you know, it takes a little bit of testing as well. Usually you push through a few samples, ask your bookkeeper if it's looking right, refine that, things like that. So it's a bit of a process, but like I said, you do this once, right? So it's a little automation project. You set this up, and then when you're ready, you just click publish, and then Zapier basically sits there waiting for payments to come in. So every time one of these comes in on the YouLi side, this Zap here is going to get triggered. So now we can see that this is live. So it's on, and basically you don't have to do anything else. I mean, you know, check on it every once in a while. You can click into the Zap history and make sure that the payments are coming through, and it'll alert you if something is going wrong. But it's really great because then just the money comes in on one side, the invoice gets created on the QuickBooks side, and your bookkeeper can manage that on the QuickBooks side. And yeah, you just focus on delivering your trips.
So it's not like you mentioned Xero, and it sounds like even though this isn't a direct integration, it's almost simpler because it's less, you don't have to do anything. You just turn it on and then are pretty hands-off for the rest of it once it's all set up.
Absolutely. So it's a bit more work to set up. So our Xero integration is a native integration on the platform. You can go search our help articles, Xero, Xero, and you can see how that works. But it does require you or your bookkeeper to click in, choose which payments to push, and then those push over. And we don't allow a lot of customization there. So it just creates a draft invoice. Whereas this one you can actually control. Because of the way that Zapier sits in between, you can choose to change this description. You don't like what we suggested? That's fine. You could put the person's name there. You could put just the trip name there. You can customize a lot of these things, and you can adjust the taxes. You can adjust, like in this case, we've done services. You might have your own products that you've loaded into QuickBooks and you want those to match. So all of that is possible using this automation flow, whereas it's not possible in that Xero integration that we have. So there's kind of pluses and minuses between the two approaches, and you really just need to see how important is it for it to be real time, and how important is it that you need to be able to control these things I'm showing you here versus being able to control manually. Like some people like manual, some people like the sense of control of like going in and being like, I only want to bring this one and this one and this one. Whereas this is, you set up your rules and then it just pushes whatever qualifies based on the rule that you've set.
Great.
Okay, are we feeling ambitious and about moving on to the more complicated scenarios?
I think so.
Okay, so this is a YouLi to QuickBooks automation. There's no tax and there's no line items. So then my next example is with line items. So one of the things that we have here is, so it's very similar, new payment on trip, find a customer, but now we have this new thing. So this is why I was saying it's a bit more advanced. And so this is an example of one of the powerful features of Zapier. It's called a utility, a formatter utility. You don't have to know too much about this. This is the great thing about the fact that we're going to publish this sample and you can actually just pull this in. But it's basically allowing you to pull in not only the trip itself, but you can pull in any YouLi fees, any credit card surcharges, and any credit card fees as well. So this is just an example of using what's called a line itemizer to pass not just the payment amount, but that payment amount broken down into payment, credit card surcharge, YouLi fee, and credit card fee. So I'm not going to go into this in too much depth. I'm just going to say if you need to use this one, then make sure that your make sure that you're using the sample that we've created and you're adjusting from here. I would say you definitely need somebody who's familiar with Zapier to work with this one, or book in time to consult with us on this if you want to make any modifications to this. But then the action is the same thing that we talked about before. That's the ability to skip this if it's not an actual payment, a successful payment. And then the last step looks very, very similar. The only difference is that instead of having the description just be one static thing, it's actually using the line item output from the that sort of utility above that we just talked about. So this is a bit of, we're stepping into programming here. So this is generating what we call an array. So instead of just having one line item, you actually have 3 line items, but it actually rolls up into this one row here. So our description, our quantity, and our amount, but there's actually 3 things in each of those. So this is if you actually want to have line items broken down inside your invoices, which can be really handy, especially if you're doing things like refund protect, you're doing credit card surcharges, and you need to account for those into different accounts inside QuickBooks. So advanced feature, I'm not going to get into every bit of this. Basically, if you want to do line items, take our sample and then work with your Zapier expert to make sure that it's doing the right thing for the data that you have, because you might not have YouLi fees, you might not have credit card surcharges, right? So whether or not this is right for you is very dependent on your YouLi configuration and your access to somebody on the to set this up correctly for you, because it is you definitely need much more of a developer kind of person to help you with this samples app.
Great, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so basically it just means that you're complicating your life a little bit on setup because you've got these 3 things here. So your YouLi fee, your credit card surcharge, your payment amount. But of course, on the QuickBooks side, it means that there's more data there for your bookkeeper to actually work from. Otherwise, they might have to do that split manually, right? And this is all about automation, right? And so the thing about automation is, if you do it by hand, there's a lot more fine-grained control, but it means every time you do it, you have to get it right. Whereas automation is more work up front because you have to figure out what you need it to be, and then less work every time an invoice is processed, right?
Yeah.
All right, so that's the all line items case. And now we're going to move on to the ultimate. So this is the scenario, and as you can see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 actions, and then we have within the 5th one, it's actually a path. So now we actually have a branch where we're going to do different things based on what's happening within QuickBooks. So are we ready for the ultimate? Now, this is what the best and brightest minds in QuickBooks and accounting automation have told us is the right way to do it. So if you are committed to doing the right kind of accounting, which of course you are, right? Then this is the one that you're going to want to wrap your head around. And so that's going to be a new payment within YouLi, finding your customer in QuickBooks, same as it was, right? And then this one is that filter that we talked about before, but now we've got an extra little element here. So now we're actually going to be pulling through things that are successful or refunded. Yes. So now we're going to start pulling in some refunded payments that are being pushed through. And we're going to, and then we're going to find an invoice. This is a new action. We didn't have this in any of the other ones. Before, we were only finding the customer, but now we're going to go and look and see, is there already an invoice for this customer for this trip? And if there is already this invoice, then we do 2 different things. So if the invoice exists, we go down one path, and the invoice does not exist, we go down a different path.
Okay.
So let's start with the invoice does not exist, because that's the case that that gets hit first, right? That first payment that comes in that creates the booking. Now this customer, let me just make sure I have this right. Yeah, so this is, if the invoice does not exist, then you need to create the invoice. Makes sense, right? If the invoice doesn't exist, make the invoice. It's just that simple. And this is the same action here as we saw in the really simple case that we started with. It's the same exact thing, same exact structure within this. So when you're doing your setup, your action, it's all the same data that we saw before. But what's complicated about this scenario, or more advanced about this scenario, is the other case. So now you've created that invoice. Now that was because they made a deposit. So Dave paid his $500 and he's now booked in. You've now created an invoice for the total cost of that trip. So not just for the amount of the payment, but for the total cost of the trip. And then the next step is he's going to make a second payment. Now, maybe that's the full balance, or maybe that's just an installment. And then when it comes here, we're going to see Dave's second payment, let's say for $1,000, comes through. The invoice will already exist. And so in my sample data, it doesn't execute this path. That's why it says it would not have continued. But basically, we're saying only continue if the ID from the lookup exists. And if it does, then you're not going to make an invoice. You're going to make a payment. And so that
because
payment,
the invoice already exists. So you're just adding
right.
a payment to that invoice. Okay.
Exactly. And so here you're going to see that we're actually making a payment instead of an invoice, and we're associating that with the invoice. So see where it says
this is what
line
somebody would
linked
want to
invoice.
do if they have installments set up in YouLi,
Yes.
because then they're taking multiple payments. They want that to be recorded that these are different payments, not just
Right.
one. Okay.
And so see how we're depositing this to accounts receivable? We're telling your bookkeeper this money should be coming. So it's accounts receivable. You should expect this money. And when that money lands in whatever account it's coming to, they can match that to this payment that's sitting in accounts receivable and line those up and go, oh, that $1,000 that came into this PayPal account, or that came into this bank account, or wherever it's coming into, I can match that to Dave's $1,000 payment, right? So the reason why I say this is advanced is, you will need a bookkeeper who really understands how to properly manage accounts, right? This is not, simple cash flow model is like money comes into bank account, money goes out of bank account, right? Nice and clean, but not where sort of the more mature businesses are going to be, which is that they're going to be having these accounts receivable. They're going to be recognizing this revenue in the future, not now, right? And so this mechanism of doing this ensures that your accounting platform has visibility into the invoices that are outstanding. The accounts receivable is correct based on your booking platform syncing to it. And then you'll see that this is the payment amount that's coming through. Whereas when we made the invoice, we actually set it to be the total amount for the trip, right?
Got it.
And of course, now you can see why we might need to do a refund. And so I actually haven't built this out completely. We would need to add that extra step of, if it is a refund, it's actually a negative amount, but that will come through as a negative amount here. And so you just need to do some testing to make sure that looks correctly within your QuickBooks, because it'll come in as a refund of negative 751 or whatever. And then that just means that invoice has more outstanding. And of course, if you then need to have that canceled, you can certainly set that up in your Zapier. You could say, if it is a refund, then void the invoice, for example. Right? You can do those kinds of things. Now, my sample Zapier doesn't have that level of complexity, but you could certainly build that in here to further automate the cancellation and refund scenarios. But since every business does things differently, like sometimes, how you want to account for those canceled cases in terms of how those change your invoices, that's kind of up to you and your bookkeeper. right? And I think the fact that you're creating these invoices in QuickBooks means that you have to handle that refund scenario, because now you have this outstanding invoice in your accounting platform. You have to handle that. That's why this is a more complicated scenario. Whereas with the first one that I gave you, with this nice, simple, 4-step one that we talked about at the beginning, and in this case, payment equals invoice. If they don't make another payment, no problem, right? Like that money did come in, and if you refund it, you do need to account for that, but you don't have an outstanding invoice sitting around that you have to account for. Now, I say that as if it's better. It's simpler, but from an accounting perspective, it's not better. So keep in mind that if you're using this really simple one, you're really just handling your cash flow. You're not handling your accrual, and you're not necessarily handling all the complexities that come with these kinds of payments and invoices. So while we have this as an example to kind of get you started, I would say that this is really just a way of like pushing through an invoice so your bookkeeper can do what they need to do manually, because you aren't necessarily at the level of automating what we just showed you in the third example. If you're not ready to automate at that level, that's totally fine. This automation might get you started and might help your bookkeeper reduce just a little bit of their work, but then they will have to manually handle all that extra stuff that I was talking about with regards to, like that this is actually Dave's second payment on a total invoice of 5,000 or something like that. So yeah, I'm going to pause there. I'm trying to be clear in terms of
you definitely are. It's making sense. I did have a thought, just a kind of a side thought, but talking about, if somebody did just want to only manage payments, and I know we're talking about QuickBooks here, but since YouLi has those fields available, that data available, could you theoretically push like a payment to even a spreadsheet, or if you want to do a spreadsheet and QuickBooks?
Exactly. So look, if you don't want to, like, if you're watching this video and thinking, Zapier looks too hard for me, I don't have somebody who knows how to do that, I don't even want to try. That's totally fine. If that's where you're at, you can come into your global payments report, you can select all your payments and export them out to a CSV, and then load them into your spreadsheet, into whatever accounting, like if you're doing QuickBooks Desktop. So noting that Zapier only works with QuickBooks Online, you can totally come in here and download your data and then do whatever it is that you need to do in your spreadsheets. And I know a lot of people are still there. You're still in spreadsheets. I understand, no judgment, so definitely reports, payments is the place to get that data. And you'll notice that we do have we have a new bookings report that's just been released. Now this is for our enterprise customers. This is that distinction I was just making between invoice and payments, right? So your bookings are really equivalent to an invoice, right? Because that's sort of saying, oh, I've got, Dave booked in, he made a payment of 500, but let's say, so he still has, here I've got Xerxes still owes $13, right? So these are more like an invoice showing you the summary of how much they owe and how much they've paid. So these are lots of different ways to look at your data. I know that most of our clients are not so much data people as they are travel and people. And that's why you come to us, so that we can help you do the right things here and to give you the data that you and your advisors need to properly account for your trip bookings and payments. Did that answer your question, Sean?
Yes, it did. Yeah. Great. I just wanted people to know that if they want to keep track of this information, if they want to keep track of their payments, they still can, even if they're not at the QuickBooks level, or ready for the Zapier, all that goes into getting ready for Zapier or paying for Zapier or anything like that. They still can access that in a simplified way.
That's right. Absolutely. So we're here to support you whatever stage you're at with your accounting and your sophistication. So hopefully this has inspired you to explore Zapier and set up the real-time automation, pushing payments from YouLi into your QuickBooks Online, or even into your Xero or there's so many online accounting platforms. So choose your flavor. We've just shown you QuickBooks because that's the most popular one within our clients, but there's nothing that stops you from picking any of the other platforms that Zapier supports. And even, you could actually push that data into a spreadsheet. So, one of the options you have in Zapier is, instead of the action of create invoice, you could actually create a row in a Google Sheet, for example, if that's how you're handling your accounting at this stage. So yeah, we're here to make your data available to you to automate your life, automate the digital part of your life so that you can get offline and enjoy being out in the world.
Awesome. And yeah, and if anyone does have a bookkeeper and they're struggling with Zapier, they can always get on a consulting call with us. If you send us an email at support@youli.io, you'll get me, and I can get that call set up for you. So, if you're having trouble with the Zapier portion of it, we can support you in getting all of that sorted.
Thank you so much, Sean, for asking all the good questions. And we look
course.
forward to having comments and questions in our community. If you are looking for advisors, be sure and ask your fellow businesses who they use to organize their books correctly. Thanks so much,
Great
everyone.
information. Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.